let's look at stereotypes. What about Marion the librarian in Music Man and a potential scenario for poor Mary in It's a Wonderful Life? Marion was this old maid who loved her books, and she was in a quiet library, and she was pulled from that life, rescued, if you will, by a flamboyant con man. In It's a Wonderful Life, Jimmy Stewart's character was granted his wish to see the world if he'd never lived, or if he'd never been born. Well, in the alternate scenario, without him to rescue her, Mary, who would have become his wife, found that her fate was ultimately to be a librarian. She too needed to be rescued. So, why do we want to be librarians? Why do we want to be information professionals? Information architects, masters of e-content, or as somebody said to me last night over dinner, information evangelist. So, what's the value of information professionals to parent organizations? When an information center or a library is founded, finite resources are supplied. Joseph R. Matthews wrote an article titled Determining and Communicating the Value of the Special Library. It was published in March 2003, the issue for Information Outlook. So when you set up a library or an information agency, you need resources. You need staff, you need funding, the collection, print or electronic, and you develop your set of services. And from the services, there is a potential benefit impact on the organization, like the software company I talked about and the salesperson being able to close the deal. So why would you want to do this? And I've actually had somebody say to me, a vice president in fact, well, you know, it's all on the internet and it's free. Isn't that great? Well, you get what you pay for. And in terms of making business decisions, you have to really think about what you want to do. You know, in terms of the software company and the salesperson I told you about, what was the benefit of tracking down that mystery quote? Well, first of all, he blew the socks off the client. That was number one. Sold more software, so the library added value for the company. Well, how do you measure value? Some of what I've shared with you today are anecdotes, stories, but how about those numbers, the numerical data that you can use as feedback? Input measures are relatively easy to collect and quantify. For example, the collection that I have currently right now, the collection size equals 94,443 volumes. There you go. There's a factoid for you. But also, how about the process that you can measure activities with? In other words, transforming the raw materials, the resources into services which are offered by the library. For example, if you're doing journals, whether it's e-journals or whatever, what is it really costing the company? For example, and this goes back to the computer software company, what was the cost of cutting a check in a specific industry? And one of the things that information centers can do, one of the value adds, is leveraging the advantage, whether you're buying market research reports or if you're purchasing journals. Instead of cutting a check for every single journal, one of the classic examples is using a subscription agency. So a case study that I did for this particular VP was to say, all right, it's costing us X amount of dollars, and what I found was that it was $105 per check. That was what it was actually costing to cut a check in the software industry. Multiply that by the number of journals that we had in the collection and say, all right, I've added it all up. Look at the spreadsheet. This is what we're spending. By going with the subscription agency, here's the amount. So then again, it becomes very, very clear, and it isn't buried in a lot of different terms and things like that. The numbers are there, and you can go from there. Suffice to say, it improved efficiency, and we did end up being able to go with the subscription agency, and it worked out very, very well. So, outcome measures equal impact, like that Mr. Smith story I told you about. It's really much harder to quantify in terms of layers of complexity, and I'm thinking about Nortel networks and what we did there. One of the things I always dread secretly, of course this isn't secret, it's being broadcast to the entire world, but at Nortel we used to do did CSATs, which are customer satisfaction surveys, and we had people fill them out, and we really used them to quantify the amount of time and the amount of dollars that we were saving. The thing about this is, and this doesn't always happen in the profession, but we were rated on our performance every single week. So that feeling in the pit of your stomach on Tuesdays because the ratings were coming out, it was all on one spreadsheet, and you could see what your work was like that week. What did your customers think about the information that you were providing for them? I've only seen that model used at Nortel, but it was fascinating, it was very effective, and you just had to jump in. As I say, Tuesdays, sometimes you sort of wondered. In terms of ROI, or return on investment, the current dean at Chapel Hill, Jose Marie Griffiths, and her research partner Don King conducted a groundbreaking study for the Florida State Library, and you may have heard about this. Essentially, this was about 1.5 years ago, and if you look at public libraries as an economic investment, what they discovered through their research is that in Florida, for public libraries, that for every dollar that was spent on a public library, the return on it was $6.54. They absolutely quantified it. Ask me later if you want more specifics on that. You can do the balanced scorecard approach. How do customers see your information center? And what do you excel at? What are you providing? How can you continually improve and create value? In other words, innovations. And how does the library look to stakeholders, specifically the budget, the finance part of it? Joseph Matthews also added an additional perspective in his model. Information resources includes collection, electronic databases, and services like interlibrary loan. So if you you start with questions like this, you can see if the improvements in one area have been at the expense of another area. It's just sort of the high-level view on that one. But thinking strategically, making choices. Who do you serve? Who do you actually serve? And who do you want to serve? What information resources and services do you provide? What does the org chart look like? And the fundamental issue is to identify the aspects of services in the collection that add the most value for your customers. Time saved, revenue generated, money saved. So these are some of the crucial issues to consider in a career path in special libraries, information centers, etc. I hope that some of the real-life examples and the methods that I've outlined for quantifying the value are useful to you in class and beyond as you progress in your career. And I hope that your involvement with SLA truly shapes your future. Thank you. To my mind, as far as I know, it was only done for the Information Resource Center. And essentially, it had to do with the research services that we were offering. And when you looked at it, because there were 68 of us, and again, subdivided, we had some people who handled the web portal part of it, and then other people like myself who were doing instruction and actually doing the searches. And just so you know, in terms of the searches, an average searcher, if you were pretty good at it, you handled 45 searches a week in a regular, 40-hour time frame. Some of the searches were extraordinarily extensive, and others were, a couple hours. You could probably turn it up. Sometimes it's market research reports. It really depended. But it was a spreadsheet, and it was across every single question that we answered, and we answered tons of questions every year. And it was global. And at the time that I worked for Nortel, there were 86,000 people working for the company globally. Okay, it was late 90s, 2000, 2001, 2002, and essentially the information was very, very specialized because of the type of business that Nortel is in, and essentially at that point in time, optical was predicted to be really, really big. But you never knew if you were going to get a question from an engineer. For example, we rolled the time zones because we were spread out geographically. We said, we cover about 21 hours out of 24. which is essentially the way we rolled it. So typically in North Carolina, we would get a lot of people from the UK, so I tended to do a lot of work for engineers who might be working on a specific phone switch. We also had a highly specialized standards collection, a historic standards collection, which is quite valuable to a telecom company, because if you are an engineer, you're working on a specific piece of equipment and the standard is brand new and shiny and great. Well, what about the phone switch? Maybe you're in Mexico, you're working on a phone switch that was a couple of standards ago. If you're trying to troubleshoot, having that piece of information is vital. And in terms of standards, once a new standard is out, you don't necessarily have the historical information that you're going to need. So that's just one example. But it was great. It was a great learning experience and wonderful people to work with. They had access to pretty much everything. There were a few market research reports and analyst services that were not on our portal, if you will, but frankly, standards are so specialized and it takes quite a while to learn how to use them and to actually retrieve them. There's more of an art than science to it. And so what we found is people are like, wait a minute, I'm really busy. I just don't have time to do this. Can you find what I need? And again, access to the information. Essentially, what happened is having a start at a place like the National Humanities Center made me very, very skilled at searching anything. Especially, and Libby did not pay me to say this, but especially the dialogue skills, because if you can learn that, and Bonnie Snow actually was the person who taught me dialogue, so that's who I learned from. People like that who mentored me along, and what happened is, I mean, you might think Humanities Center, then she went to a software company, but it was continuing, it was professional development, it was education along the way. I had a boss who was very interested in technology. I was very interested in technology. So we did some things on a smaller scale at the Humanities Center that some other people simply weren't trying. So I really learned as I went. But the skill sets that we have as information professionals are transferable. And the thing is, at Nortel, the bust happened for us in 2001. And essentially all 68 people were right-sized, if you will, or made redundant. Right-sized is Nortel speak for losing your job. But at any rate, they were very fair. It happened, the bottom fell out of the market sector. And that's what happens occasionally. And if you want to go into corporate, you just need to know that going in terms of risk. But to answer your question completely, see, I'm a reference librarian, you can tell. But at Nortel, we took the same courses that the engineers took. I learned about ruggedized handsets and all kinds of things. I actually saw fiber optic cables. So essentially, the company expected you to have that knowledge base, but they provided the infrastructure so that you could take courses online, you could do some face-to-face, et cetera, et cetera. So frankly, you know, after what happened in 2001, I always felt kind of sorry for people who were an expert, say, in one particular type of phone switch, because I can work anywhere, and so could my colleagues. We had a toolkit that would allow us to transfer those skills across subject areas. I will tell you that Dialog is absolutely my absolute favorite in terms of looking at the variety of databases. And of course, we're in a web environment and everything has its usefulness, but there is always a place. What I'm talking about is essentially, we would have almost weekly face-to-face, we'd have teleconferences, and essentially we had software, which it's more sophisticated now. If you were on the phone with someone and you're trying to teach them how to use a database, whether it's ACM or IEEE, InSpec, some of the engineering databases, that you can literally take control of their personal computer and you can guide them through, step them through. Also, especially and I was in Research Triangle Park, North Carolina, so we had quite a number of people, again, who were in sales and marketing, so we would have monthly, sometimes twice a month, essentially resource sessions. We would have vendors come in, we would do sessions very much like this setup, and we would literally say to people, all right, give us 30 minutes and we're going to show you how to navigate this tool. What you want them to do is you want them to see what the database is like, and then whenever they'll get the low-hanging fruit, you know, the 80-20 rule, so they'll get some of the stuff. But then if you start getting into very specialized areas, or say the database has a very different interface and you have to have some practice with it, then I think it actually makes them appreciate you all the more. Essentially, what ended up happening is the qualifications, the MLS was the qualification for every job that I had looked at. I've been called many different things in the course of a career, from a senior research analyst to a librarian, et cetera, and I care less about the title part of it. I think that when you are hiring, and I work with a lot of students, it's a real privilege, and I learn so much from students. I learn as much or more than they learn from me, I hope. Anyway, it's a great opportunity, and so we talk a lot about job searches. And what I always suggest, because as a hiring manager, I can spot boilerplate resume from 20 feet. So it's well worth the time it takes to do the research on the company, see what their corporate culture is like. That's what it's all about. And is that a good fit for you? Is that a place where you want to be, whether it's information architect or, as Bob Boyko says, information gals and guys. That's what he said a couple of weeks ago in Vancouver at a content management conference. So, because we were talking about, are we going to simply, one of the things, a question I ask is, are we simply all going to be informationists in 5, 10, 15 years? I think that's really not the issue. The issue is, what are the skill sets? What are the value you can bring? And go from there. I actually have taught management, but frankly, being the library director at the library school and being SLA president and having the opportunity to meet with groups like this keeps me pretty busy. So right now, oh, and I'm the SLA faculty advisor for the student group. I bet you're not surprised. It has absolutely been a pleasure to speak with you this afternoon. I appreciate the opportunity and like to say thanks to Ken, to Bill, and to Libby. So thank you very much.